everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. It is great to be here this afternoon. Thank you all for coming together. Someone made the joke that this is like nerd prom, and all the cool people are here, and I am so excited to be a part of it. We're here today to talk about the future of the built environment in Central Ohio, and I would be remiss if I didn't recognize all the elected leaders from throughout Central Ohio. If you're an elected leader in Central Ohio, would you please stand and be recognized? Mr. Mayor. So as I'm sure you've heard, we got some new folks moving to town. And we've seen plenty of examples of fast-growing cities that have not planned for the growth. Cities that are now plagued by traffic congestion and have become unaffordable for longtime residents. We're here today to talk about how this community can get inclusive growth right. Because the decisions that we make about transit, about housing, and about our built environment in the next few years will structure our region's growth for decades to come. This question of how to grow the right way was a recurring theme in conversations with my friend Yarmir Steiner. So we decided to try to answer our own question. With the help of MORPC, Yarmir and I brought together public and private partners to analyze how various transit and growth strategies could impact families, businesses, and local governments in Central Ohio. You'll notice this isn't a Columbus study, this is a regional study. And it's that shared commitment to our collective success that makes this region strong. Today, we'll hear about how to make this region even stronger. You'll hear what our current trajectory could mean for this region, as well as what focusing new housing and businesses along transit corridors could mean for Columbus. Change is coming. Our region is growing. We have a short window to get inclusive growth right. Insight2050 Corridor Concepts provides a data-based foundation for our region, a common understanding about growth and mobility that we can use to radically increase the number of households with easy access to jobs, that we can use to dramatically expand transportation options and develop equitably. With that, I'll hand the podium over to my co-chair, Mr. Yarmir Steiner.
Well, good afternoon. I'm Yarmir Steiner, the chairman of ULI Columbus and the CEO of Steiner & Associates. I also have the pleasure chairing this together, the Insight2050 Corridor Concept with my friend, Council President Harden. Thank you, Shannon, for your leadership and drive. And this has been very instrumental for this regional growth discussion. And we thank you for your dedication to this city and to our region. What's an exciting time to be in Columbus? You know, I would have never thought I was going to say those things when I moved here 20 years ago. You know, we are going to grow to 3 million people, you know, by 2050. Already, the growth of our region in the last 10 years more than exceeds the growth of the whole state. We are the engine driving the growth of the state. We have seen an incredible, unprecedented level of urban infill, new projects coming together. Last year, we had 120 persons. Our population increased by 120 people every day, every calendar day. I mean, think of the houses we need, think of the cars we need, the traffic it adds. And still, we have a great quality of life. And like maybe Peter Calthorpe will mention later, the biggest problem we have is that we don't have any acute problems. That's unusual when you try to fix them, but we want to be ready for our future growth. So that's why we wanted to learn lessons, not to make the mistakes that other similar cities did. And we have used examples like Charlotte and Nashville and Austin with our ULI colleagues and try to learn from them about the things not to do or the things to do. So that Insight2050 study came from that effort, not to fix a problem, but rather to avoid future problems, to maintain our quality of life and economic prosperity here. In the first phase of that study, 2050, we basically learned that an overall dense environment. And I really would like everybody to relax when you talk about dense. Dense in Ohio means more than 6 units an acre. So that's about Italian village, German village, etc. So it's not, density like downtown. But what we discovered through that study, that if we densify our urban environment globally, it's fiscally responsible, that we spend less taxes, we save household money for energy, home, and transportation costs. We drive less, so we spend maybe more time with our families. The air quality improves, so everything kind of works better. We save money and we improve air quality. But the question was, you increase density, so how do you go about this? As you know, we are a home rule state. That means that the Central Ohio has dozens of jurisdictions to determine land use. So how can you help with that analysis? We went to the best experts around the world to try to find out what was that approach ought to be. And that approach was go to a cross-jurisdictional approach of high-density mobility corridors. That is, let's say transit corridors. That is, don't worry about if the density is one city or another, but densify the places where it makes sense to densify, and that was the corridors. So those corridors are 50 miles of roads that we picked, about a mile wide, so 50 square miles. And we studied the impact of coordinated strategies on those right-of-ways. I would like to emphasize the 5 roads, and you will see them later, that we picked, and some of you have seen them before, are not the 5 strips or corridors that we want to develop. We just picked 5 who are representative, a mix of corridors who kind of had all case studies involved in them. Columbus could use 10, 12 corridors. The first one to develop might not be these ones, but at least they were a good template to make that analysis on. And so basically those corridors will have been studied as being means of transit, high-capacity transit, and then with a few other measures that will go together along. But the important thing is we did not pick the mode of transit. Yesterday someone was asking the question, what should be the mode of transit? And I said maybe steam engines, locomotives, like in the past. I was being tongue-in-cheek, but clearly we are not picking anything. The important thing is those transit corridors have to be able to move lots of people fast, and that can be done with many different ways. But one constant for all those ways is right-of-way acquisition. We need to have right-of-ways on those corridors, so then whatever mode of transport we pick, it can be implemented on them. So what is the next steps? The next steps, once you see this study, then we'll have to determine, what a corridor is. Because right now, this is, 50 miles of 1 mile wide strips. But in addition to transit, those corridors will have to incorporate other issues like land use strategies. In a corridor like this, what kind of density do we allow? In a corridor like this, will the entitlement process be facilitated, be smoother? In a corridor like this, will you give, for example, tax benefits to the people who develop in those corridors? And what do we ask them in return for example, workforce housing or affordable housing? So those packages have to be put level at a regional level, so that then each jurisdiction at their own level can make those decisions whether they want to adopt some of them, or they want to modify them, how to go about it. I would like first at this point to thank all the partners and funders who made that possible. Their names on the board. This would not have been possible without everybody's participation. Please notice that all the smaller communities who participated in addition to Columbus, that truly has been a group effort, incorporating everybody's concerns and agendas. So thank you for putting that together. And also a big thank you goes to MORPC, the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission, because they have been really the machine who run this operation, in the last year or so. So now, though, I would like to invite Peter Calthorpe and Jodi Stefano, who are the co-founders and principals of Urban Footprint, and who will present us the Insight2050 Corridor Concept Study findings. So please give a big welcome to Peter and Joe. one last word about Peter. Come here. I want you to know that, in Columbus, we always try to bring the best and brightest to teach us or to tell us about what's happening in the world. Peter doesn't speak about those things, but his firm is the firm who organized the planning tools for the biggest cities in China, 6 of them, I think. Then those principles that they developed entirely by them have been made into national law in China. That's a country of 1 billion people. And now there have been tens of cities who are being developed and who have been developed following their principles, reducing enormously the carbon footprint of those populations. So, although here he's coming to help us with Columbus, and then he talks about the Bay Area and Honolulu and Utah and so forth, their company, through their efforts, made a huge, transformation in China. Obviously, they don't have the dozens of home rule jurisdictions down there. One Mr. Xi says, that's what we do, then the whole country, tens of millions of them do it. We don't have that here. Peter.
Yeah, I got a little lazy on the implementation side of things in that particular work. But, the root of it is the same all over the world, which is more and more people understand they need to build cities around people, not cars, not abstract things, not isolated buildings, but return to the basic postulate that communities are what make the human condition healthy, and building communities as the fundamental element in a city is almost universal. And it has to do with walkability, it has to do with mixed use, it has to do with accessibility for everybody. It has to do with integrating different kinds of people, different age groups, different family types. All those things are what add up to the synergy and strength of cities and why cities are the future. It's now 50% of the global population, and it's going to go to 70%. That transition represents 3 billion more urban residents between now and 2050. We're going to double the quantity of urban environments in the next 30 years. So getting it right is really at the heart of sustainability in terms of environmental issues, and in terms of social issues, in terms of economic opportunity. It is so important. And, the fact that every place has unique issues and unique solutions is what's really, significant and wonderful about each place. But there is this common ground. We're all human beings. We all need time to be together and to interact. And more the technology that seems to be riding across the world is dividing us, isolating people spending too much time on their iPhone, too much time in commutes, too much time just laying back and watching TV, not having the common ground that bring people together. So enough for the sermon, and we'll now go to what can really happen here. This is, the fact that you guys are ahead of the curve, that you're willing to take on problems before they overwhelm you, is what's unique about Columbus. I don't know any other place that has actually set out and said, we're going to solve this problem before it overwhelms us. And I think this idea of future-proofing this state, and the city, is really a key element. And the fact that you're capable of thinking that way, and also you're capable of having a unified, diverse group, from business leaders to government leaders to community, citizen leaders, and different various special interest groups all working together, that's at the heart of a healthy place. And so you already, to a certain degree, you already have a healthy place. You're just looking for the physical manifestation that makes sense. I want to show you the physical manifestation that doesn't make sense. So here's my home, the Bay Area, where we have let the cost of housing go out of control. The distance and delay in commuting gets so extraordinary that the low-income workforce is burdened with so much time away from family and away from community and away from each other, that it's no longer a lifestyle that works. You know, Joe and I, when we think about the next phase for urban footprint, we're going to establish the next business outside of the Bay Area. It's not affordable. It's not the kind of place that we can get at the long-term sustainability and community that we want to see our workforce have. And that's what can make this area truly unique. Look at the asymmetry there. 500,000 jobs and only 72,000 houses built. I mean, and that, of course, leads to these kinds of prices, and these prices drive out the people that you need the most to have complete communities and the social and economic and equity ladder that everybody has to go on. Shown there is a corridor, because corridors are the topic today. And this is the old El Camino Real, the royal way where the Spaniards settled California. And we asked the question, how much housing could we put on that one corridor that runs through the heart of Silicon Valley? Look at it. It's a wasteland of parking lots and single-story commercial buildings at the heart of one of the most vital economic engines and high-end communities, you know, so it's underutilized land at the heart of the whole thing. What could happen there? We asked Urban Footprint to just show us all the commercial property that is low density, all the land that basically Amazon is going to put out of business, if not sooner or later. This is, you know, bricks and mortar are no longer where people are going to be doing their shopping. And so this is the land of opportunity at the heart. This is what it looks like. I mean, this is a place where you cannot tell the difference between an office building and a parking structure. It is, and it's too large, and it's not part of anybody's community. It's maybe the edge of a community. It separates communities rather than bringing them together. And that is the great opportunity, which is if you think of corridors are where communities come together rather than are separated, you're going to do a lot better. Now, this is what these corridors could be. I call them grand boulevards. They could be the place where the housing segment that's missing gets filled, where the surrounding neighborhoods have a place to walk to, where transit can be located, where local jobs and shops can mingle and create walkable social environments. It turns out that in that one corridor, we can get 250,000 households. That's almost the population of San Francisco, strung along one linear place that weaves together this amorphous domain called Silicon Valley. All of a sudden, there would be a there. It ends in San Jose, which was famously quipped, there is no there. And so we can build a sense of place and community at the same time that we solve practical problems, housing, transportation, at the same time that we have yet another economic engine, which is development in the right place. Now, a lot of people seem to think autonomous vehicles are going to be the solution, that we don't need to think about things as place-based. They're just ubiquitous. They go anywhere, anytime. The problem with going anywhere, anytime is it's going to generate a lot more traffic. The long story is if you thought the single-occupant vehicle was a problem, the zero-occupant vehicle, the ZOV, is going to be the nightmare that we're all going to confront. Literally, people will take an autonomous vehicle to work, and rather than paying for parking nearby, they'll send it to some remote location. They may even send it home to be used midday for an errand. Or if the people are out shopping, there's a whole bunch of data that shows that it'll be cheaper for them to just have the car circle and while they're waiting to be picked up. All of this will create a congestion nightmare, and it will further isolate people. More time in commutes, longer commutes. Maybe it's okay because you can work and watch a movie, but you're still going to be isolated. You're still not spending time with family or community or your kids or the people you work with. You're sitting alone again. And this is what is really eating at our society. So that's no answer. Transit. Problem with transit is it's slow and expensive. I've been the advocate for transit-oriented development for 30 years. And, until we get to the next generation of transit, where it's fast, convenient, and not so expensive, we're not going to overthrow the car. And this is the big challenge. The good news is, I think there is a new generation of transit about to come, and lo and behold, it's being driven by the same thing that could destroy us, autonomous vehicles. So bus rapid transit, the most affordable, and in this picture you see the critical piece. You need the right-of-way. You need a place where you can travel faster if you choose to travel with other people. And it's that speed and convenience that makes people give up the car. And so that space, public space, doesn't cost anything because we already own it. But it's about priorities. In that street right away, how much should be for the pedestrian? How much should be for bikers? How much should be for private cars? How much should be for transit? We have to get smart about how we divvy up this amazing resource. Here in China, they've already got autonomous buses running. They just paint a line on the street, and it takes the route, just like that. And you know, with this kind of technology, you could, with the same bus operators, you can run 4 times as much transit through a region. The more transit you get, the more places it goes. The more places it goes, the better served everybody is, and the more likely people are to use it. If transit only goes a few places, a lot of people look at it and say, well, I'm not going to use it. I'm not going to pay taxes for it. But if it's ubiquitous, because this new technology makes it affordable, all of a sudden we have a different game. In Singapore, they're looking at these autonomous vans, which make it even better, because these can be programmed to pick up a small group of people and go direct to destination. Every ride is a Uber-like express bus. You don't have to stop at any intermediate point. And the numbers come in pretty dramatically. On El Camino, it turns out we have space for wide sidewalks, big bike lanes, 6 lanes of traffic, which is all they have there now, and space for whatever technology emerges as the best. But we have to have that dedicated right-of-way. Now here, it's buses or autonomous buses. There, you can have these vans that are going to take you direct to destination and not have to stop. Who knows what will be coming next, but we know we are in a disruptive moment in terms of mobility, and this is going to really help us. The numbers are stunning in terms of the average speed for these different types. You know, bar graphs in a room this big, forget it. I will give you the punchline. Construction costs goes down, and operation costs go down if we begin to move into dedicated lanes with the next generation of transportation. This is the landscape we've created, and of course it's in a landscape that only works even for local trips. Now remember that 80% of trips are to local destinations. Only 20% are the long commute, and those are even forced into cars. People like to walk, they like to bike. As a matter of fact, they vote whenever there's a survey of what people desire in their next house. They all say they want to be in a mixed-use environment where they can walk to local destinations, where they have a sense of place, a sense of community. And it's hard to shape that out of this environment. The one asset we have is the arterials that run through this, that could become ribbons of urbanism and community. So that's why we're looking at this framework, and as Jaromir stated, this is just a beginning here. There are many other corridors. I think this is the future of American cities. So you guys would be pioneering the prototype for where America goes. All across the United States, every city has this opportunity. Burned out strips that Amazon has basically extracted all the commercial value out of. These are places that are close to communities that could enhance communities rather than decay. So our study looked at, what kind of growth can we get there, and what will the community at large be like if we end up going this way? And Joe Stefano will go to, all the results that we've come up with, and they are stunning in terms of the kinds of impact. But the bottom line is, you all know this, you're region is growing rapidly. 10 years ago, we did a project in Salt Lake. It was the same configuration almost, a million people about to come into what is a very conservative place that had just dominated by large lot single family, as if one size fits all. Now, with the Mormon Church, that was kind of a postulate that seemed to make sense, but it turned out that there were still young people who needed a place, and there were, you know, it took them longer to get there, but there were empty nesters. Just took them a long time to get there. But so you're growing really rapidly, and this is what you've got to get out in front of. And this demographic shift, I always say form follows demography. And, you know, for too long we ignored it. The crash in '07, hey, Joe, tell me when my time's up, okay? Yeah, 20 seconds. 20 seconds? No, you're going to have to talk fast. You know, '07 was really a signal that one size didn't fit all, that people in the middle class couldn't afford more and more remote single-family subdivisions, and that actually, if they had a choice, they would have chosen closer in, less expensive lifestyles. But they didn't have a choice. So this is all about giving people choice. Look at the demographics, though. In the next period to 2030, it's really dominated by older people seeking the right place. And they should be able to stay in their communities. They shouldn't have to move to a different city to find the right kind of housing. And young people should be able to find that first step, whether it's a condominium or even an apartment. This data here just shows how these relationships play out. And this is why we don't need as much new subdivisions as has been the historic norm here. We need a place where higher density housing makes sense. And why does higher density housing make sense? Well, it's affordable, but it also can be near destinations and transit. And if it's not, you feel second class. I mean, to live in a high density environment in a suburban framework, you're still driving everywhere. You still have the same penalty, but you don't have the yard. So if you're going to give up your yard, you ought to get something in return, which is a great plaza or a great shopping street that you can stroll down and go to a cafe on, or easy access to a transit system that gets you to where you need to be. The preferences by age are kind of obvious. When people are in middle part of their life and they're having families and kids, they want single family. But at either end, which is the end of the demographics that are expanding, this is where the need sits. And you can build to this need for the next 20 years and probably not satiate it. This is all the preference surveys. And, you know, it's interesting, when we started on this journey way back when we started the Congress for New Urbanism, everybody said, you know, there's no such thing. Everybody wants the American dream. Everybody wants a single-family dwelling. Well, it turns out now all the realtors, all the home builders, whenever they do a preference survey, it turns out if people are given a choice, they will choose a closer, denser, but more community and walkable community. And that is a validation that we have to start from now. And so the sense of place is really at the heart of it. Transit really helps it. You know, in the way people coming and going from local shops is one way of activating the urban environment. People coming and going from transit is another way. But the more people on the street, the more lively it feels, and the more people actually want to live there. We've talked about how mobility is changing, and the change is now so rapid. You know, the bikeway thing, especially with electric bikes, enhancers I call them, for us oldsters, you know, to get up the hills, really makes a difference. But what you really need is, once again, that dedicated right-of-way. Space where it's safe to be on a bicycle makes all the difference. And all of a sudden, everybody can start to bike the last mile. Bus rapid transit I've already spoken to. It is globally recognized as the most affordable and functional type of transit. And it's a good transition. Light rail is beautiful in core areas, but it's very, very expensive. I'd rather have 5 miles of BRT than 1 mile of LRT, which is about the equivalent. And then autonomy on these right-of-ways is going to make all the difference. And the place that figures that out first, I think, will be the one who sets the mark. Is this where you come in, Joe? That's me. All right, we'll skip a couple of your slides so that you don't have... All right, there you go.
Thank you, Peter. Good afternoon, everybody. This always happens. He gets to wax on poetic and talk vision, and then I have 5 minutes to bombard you with those slides that you can't, those charts that you can't read. Let me just reiterate something that Peter said, which is, to me, and I have been, honored to work in this region for the, close to a decade now. I think about 7 or 8 years since we started the original Insight2050 process. Maybe time has flown. This is a place that I have grown to sort of learn about and love. And I fully agree with Peter in that this is a place that has a real chance to get out ahead of other places. Frankly, he's serious when we say that we're looking at growing in places like Columbus as opposed to the Bay Area, which has become a very difficult place to be 25 or 30 or 35 years old. Anyway, I think there's an immense amount of opportunity here and already an incredible set of assets to grow upon. And I'll also iterate something that's also, I think, very important here, is that we argue over and we're concerned about new technologies when it comes to mobility, different forms of density, whether we're going to grow like this or like this or like this or like this, and what's going to actually move us around. I think more than anything, this is a project about people. And this is a project about figuring out what kind of communities we want to create and foster in Central Ohio. And what are the communities that are actually going to sort of stimulate social cohesion and build on the assets that we have here? And what is the armature and the foundation for that kind of growth? And I think, as you saw in the El Camino example, and we're seeing across the country, we have an incredible asset in corridors. And this is a place that has many of those corridors. And the question is, how much growth can these new mobility, if you will. Notice we're not calling them transit corridors or automobile corridors or AV corridors. We're calling them mobility corridors. How much can we accommodate on this? And it's not just about how much can, it's how much should. Right? This is not just a data-driven exercise that says you can, fit X number of people and X number of jobs and X number of vehicles on these corridors. This is also about engaging with the community and understanding what people want, and where and how these corridors should develop over time. To do that, and I'm going to move through these relatively quickly, rest assured that everything is in a report, everything can be reviewed in great detail. I'm just going to move through some of the high-level conclusions that we got out of this. This is a very data-driven exercise to an extent, right? And we used actually our new software platform called Urban Footprint to get that done, which allows us to dig into data really quickly, allows us effectively to play SimCity for real. We're also excited that a number of folks across the region are beginning to use this. We've got OHM and MKSK, which are local consulting firms that are using it, and we'll be using it with cities, and we're also going to be working with Morpsey to facilitate the integration of the software over time into more and more cities, so that the kind of information I show you today, the kind of information we just want to put on the table, so in order for people to make more informed decisions about growth and the impacts of growth can be done as part of every planning process. That's really the vision behind Urban Footprint as a product and our company. So it's a combination of technical depth and exercise and fancy zeros and ones, but it's also a lot of stakeholder engagement. So there were project working groups, corridor working groups in which we engaged with residents and key stakeholders in order to understand, what and how these corridors, these 5 corridors, which again are representative, not the exclusive corridors for growth in the region, how these 5 corridors can grow up and prosper. From that, a series of scenarios emerged, right? So we're building crash test dummies of the future. We throw them up against the wall. We want to see what breaks now in order to understand how to future-proof this region, right? We want to understand impacts. We want to understand possibilities, and we want to use that to plan the nitty-gritty details when it comes down to cities making individual decisions within this regional framework. So I'm going to just very briefly run through those scenarios. So a couple scenarios emerged. One of them, of course, is trends. What's been happening, and what if we continue to extend into the future as we have been growing? There's some of those bar charts you can't read in a room this big. We didn't realize we had such a big room. So if we continue to grow, those million people out to 2050, if we continue to grow as we have been, about 20% of housing growth would occur on the corridors, and you can see about 40% of commercial growth. As we think about the corridors, these 1-mile bands up and down these 5 corridors, again, as representative, you can see that we can very reasonably accommodate. So this is a combination of that data and that stakeholder engagement. We can very reasonably, with very moderate modifications to density. This is not Manhattan up and down these corridors. These are modest shifts. We can very reasonably accommodate about 55% of the 420,000 new homes we need and about 60% of commercial growth. So the real question becomes, if we can do that, what are the impacts of that? So just really briefly, I'll say these, without getting into, obviously down at the very, very parcel level, there are very detailed decisions that are made at each parcel, this kind of housing unit, this kind of housing unit. But you can really boil it up to different patterns that you see across the region and that you're all deeply familiar with. Urban patterns like we see in downtown Columbus, the most intense places, the most mixed places. Compact development, which are the streetcar suburbs that built up in the 1920s, 30s, 40s, and 50s across Ohio that you have plenty of today, and some of the new development that's also compact, walkable, mixed use, and then, of course, standard suburban development, of which we also have a substantial proportion here in this region and across the country. So the scenarios are made up of different proportions, if you will. We mix and match different proportions of these growth types. So here's, urban and downtown Columbus. There's plenty of examples of compact, walkable form. And this is actually Peter's point about the National Association of Realtors and all these studies. When people say they want walkable, they want compact, these are the forms that we're talking about. And these are the places that are experiencing outsized real estate and land value gains across the country. So German Village, the new development in Dublin, portions of Easton, Granville, Upper Arlington, there are places across this region which are already compact. And in many cases, we're just looking at the scenarios kind of enhancing and expanding this kind of development at scale. And then, of course, suburban places in many portions of the region, predominated, but though not exclusively, with single-family homes, multifamily homes, and commercial developments. Here's a slide you probably can't read at all. Let me just tell you, so the bottom line here is that the majority of the region today, upwards of 80–85%, is suburban conventional development. And you can see here the current trajectory shows roughly staying on that pace at about 75%. And then new growth in the corridor scenario is instead closer to 60% compact development. Keep in mind, though, you're blending this into an existing environment, an existing, mostly suburban single-family environment, and you're only making a modest shift. So the region remains majority suburban, and you're just blending more housing choice and community choice. And in this case, you're using the corridors as the armature or the foundation for doing that. Because these corridors and the dedicated right-of-way that they provide for whatever kind of mobility ends up on them is what stimulates land demand and focuses the there, right? So there needs focus, right? We come to communities, we drive to communities so that we can walk around in them. We're now talking about communities in which you can actually walk to the place where you can also walk around in as well. And that's the there, and that's what we're seeing across the country. So what does it mean to transition, right? This is a lot about transition. These corridors, for the most part, are moving through, are creating edges for suburban places. What does it mean to transition? This is not an overnight kind of thing. This is just a photo example. This is from some work we did way back in Dallas. That's a new light rail line. This is the old world light rail line from 15 years ago or so, coming in on the right side, you can see there. So then, transition over time, infrastructure investment, improvements in streetscape. Some of the things that you're seeing here as corridors here shift over time. Look at High Street, how investments in infrastructure are stimulating development. It's a kind of public-private partnership back and forth that's going on here. And then over time, modest densities enter these corridors as well. And these are places that are transitioning. So we're talking not about an overnight change, but a transition in in a landscape. And this is how you go from that suburban, conventional to compact, and then sometimes it goes on to urban, sometimes it only goes this far. So let's actually hone in on a couple maps here, just provide a couple examples and talk about the results of the study. So here's just an example here of the northwest portion of the corridor. And just a quick shot of what's happening around there. In this case, the Northwest Corridor in the focus corridor concept scenario is taking on another 50,000 or so housing units and another 94,000 jobs. I always call them housing units. They're homes, technical term there. And you can see that this is mixed-use development. This is moderate intensity development. And it sort of increases in intensity as you hone in on the downtown, as you might expect. If we take a look at, I think, Bethel Road here, just for a moment, there's a lot of opportunity to enhance, if you will, or transition from that suburban to that compact type along a place like Bethel Road. So there, for example, just honing in a little bit, you can see the integration of mixed use and moderate intensity. So this is townhomes. In some cases, this is small lot, single family, and some multifamily making its way along that corridor. And there is a blend of development types that's going on there. So you might end up with some 4, 5, 6-story housing and mixed-use development. You might end up with 3 and 4. But in many cases, these are 1-story environments, sometimes transitioning to 2, to 3, to 4. It's modest, and it produces the kind of mixed use and intensity that allows for these places to thrive. And these are this is the variety of housing that we see in this compact use type as well. So it's not one size fits all. It ranges up and down the corridors. It ranges by community. And this is ultimately sort of a stitched together series of community decisions. And this is a sort of vision or framework within which those decisions can be made. Another example here, if you take a look at East Main, where there's a lot of potential as well, and stakeholders in particular focused on development opportunities along this corridor. So if we actually hone in there on Reynoldsburg, there we go. And you can see some of the intensification that occurs along that on Bryce Road and in and around that. There's actually a substantial amount of sort of opportunity for regional malls, strip commercial, and other development types. This is sort of a honed-in version of that El Camino study in which there's a lot of opportunity for this place to transition over time. Don't worry about the colors and all the maps and all the details. What I want to do is just walk you through the impacts, and excuse the small numbers here. I want to walk you through the impacts of that. So in that development, as we measure, kind of we model and measure how people and houses and transportation performs, and we do that with urban footprint here. We can see that in the redeveloped areas right in and around Bryce Road, on average, people are within 2 minutes of a walk to retail services, whereas in a standard suburban area just nearby, just outside the corridor, people have a 14-minute walk. And for the most part, they don't walk. They drive to those services, right? So this is a 2-minute versus a 14-minute walk. What that means is that on a per household level, people in this new compact neighborhood are driving around 4,100 miles per year versus 9,500 miles per year in the standard in the conventional version, which is just really about a mile off the corridor from this area. They're using much less energy per household, which in this case means lower utility bills, lower carbon emissions, lower pollution. They're using much less water, much less irrigated space. These are smaller lot, single-family homes, townhomes, multifamily units. They're using much less water as well. So when you roll that up to the region, and then we'll very quickly just move through some of these regional results. When you roll all, that decision, when 55% of the region is in that kind of form versus the standard suburban form that it has been taking, the impacts are substantial. So across the entire region, in this case across these 5 corridors, but it could be 6, it could be 7, it could be 8, it could be different corridors. But looking at these 5 corridors, the number of people that are within transit and walk access to jobs is dramatically different. From 74,000 up to, upwards of 250,000 people now within 45 minutes of their workplace via walk and or transit. Substantially more transit use and walking, right? So 21% of trips are being taken by foot. Upwards of 8% of trips being taken by transit, which is a substantial increase. So you obviously want investments on these corridors to reap benefits. They do see substantial benefits. And what that means is all of that non-auto travel. Keep in mind, Peter pointed out that 80% of trips are non-commute trips, and a substantial portion of those trips in these scenarios are being taken by walk, by transit, by short drive instead of long drive, and that ripples into very substantial impacts. And so looking at 17,000 vehicle miles traveled, in this case, automobile miles traveled per household in the current trajectory versus folks on the corridor only traveling about 8,000 miles per year per household. That is a substantial difference. And in most cases, that actually means more time with your family, lower costs, substantially lower pollution, and other impacts as well. So here's some of those cost numbers. On average, folks living on the corridors are saving $8,500 per year per household, for the most part due to transportation costs, also some utility cost differences. That's a big affordability component. That's more mortgage that you can afford, that's more rent, that's school, if you're depending on whether you're making a public or private school choice, that's vacation, it's whatever you want, but it's substantial. And that's a big difference, and that's a part of the affordability equation. Affordability is not just about the cost of the house, it's the cost of operating that house, which includes the transportation associated with that, the energy and the water associated with that as well. Greenhouse gas emissions, which is an increasingly important issue as well as we address climate change. Substantial reductions. Because we're reducing automobiles travel, we're reducing energy use at the household level, we're taking the equivalent of 600,000 cars worth of greenhouse gas emissions off every single year. That's very substantial. We're consuming a lot less land, and in many cases this is critical agricultural lands, habitat lands, watershed lands, other very important environmental resources. You can see the differences there. It's the equivalent of about half the city of Columbus in land consumption. And it's also substantially more cost-effective to serve that land form with wet and dry utilities and critical infrastructure. So these are the pipes and the local roads. Building those and operating and maintaining them, it turns out, is $10 billion more cost effective for the more compact landform around the corridors. So it doesn't just have these outsized environmental and other benefits, but it has substantial cost benefits as well. We look at emergency services and the ability to serve communities with police and fire. We see about a $500 million benefit when it comes to the current trajectory. And then on a revenue side, because of the outsized sort of demand profile and premium that we get from real estate around transit, walkable real estate, and intensity along the corridors, we see very substantial increases in per acre and per square foot revenues, which leads to about $1 billion more revenue from income tax, sales tax, and transfer taxes in one scenario versus another. So it's a sort of financial win in this case, which is really critical, as well as other kind of quality of life and environmental wins as well. All of this, as I noted, is encapsulated in reports. There's a summary on your tables as well, so everything I said can be interrogated in much more detail, including some very quick shots at the scenarios, all of their results. I just want to, before I close, also point out that there's been a substantial effort in part of this process to also frame out the kinds of mechanisms and implementation measures that are needed to actually get some of this done. So this is not a detailed account of how every city needs to, what every city needs to do at its code level in order to get this done. It is rather a framework that says these kinds of things, these kinds of incentives, how are we going to address affordability on the corridors in the midst of all this change? There's a set of framework and guidelines for that. What kinds of zoning changes should we be considering as we roll up our sleeves and think about how to implement this? So there's an implementation framework that goes along with this. Excuse me. And with that, I'll close. Hey, we appreciate the opportunity to have done this, and we want to thank all the folks that have been involved in designing these futures. Really, what we were doing is translating that information into the computer and being able to convey these kinds of results. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter and Joe. A fascinating presentation, but more importantly, a fascinating process that is so very important. If there was one thing that I could tell you is that this is imperative. This isn't optional. This is probably one of the most important long-term discussions we will have in the community, and it's a long-term discussion. This isn't something that's going to happen in a year or two. This will take decades, if not a century, to manifest, but we have the ability to shape it now. Some of those are words that are from the Burnham Plan of 1906. A group of civic leaders in Chicago came together to write not a physical plan, but to also write a social plan for the development of Chicago. That plan is alive and well today. Peter and his colleagues have actually participated in the updating of it. Peter and I, earlier this morning, were debating on a webcast the history of urban planning in the world over the last 2,000 years. If you're sleepy tonight, maybe you can go out and listen to it, but it was a lot of fun. And Peter reminded me that there were moments in the world's history in which we've had transformational things that have happened. And one of those was in 1956 when Al Gore Sr., a great Tennessean, passed the Interstate Highway Act that liberated, and these are words that were used to describe it back then, liberated families from the cities of America. Now imagine that, liberated them from the cities. And in the process created suburbanization. Here in Columbus, Mayor Sitzenbritter drove a water strategy that defined our city. Don Casto built the first suburban shopping center in America in Grandview. You can go look at the historic marker. We have seen those historic moments, and I would suggest to you that the era that we're living today with technology, with the opportunities to think about how we socialize with one another shifting at a rapid pace is another one of those significant eras. What will we in Columbus do with it? The Columbus Partnership puts this exercise among the highest of priorities. To be a group that can participate with the community in a discussion about the next 50 and 100 years in our community and the decisions that we will make. This isn't a one and done. This isn't a presentation. We have a nice lunch and we move on. I hope this is the start of a long-term conversation that keeps bringing us back together. There's so many people in the room that are committed to this, and I want to be one of those voices. So without further ado, we've got a great panel discussion. I want to invite them up. You have heard from Peter Calthorpe, who is the principal co-founder of the Urban Footprint, and is a pioneer around the world. We are lucky to have leaders like him that come to Columbus that are learning about Columbus. Peter, we rearranged tomorrow, so we've got that figured out. I think this community needs to be bringing thought leaders like Peter to Columbus on a consistent and regular basis because we need to go to find the best in the world to bring them to Columbus, and Peter is one of those. Joanna Pinkerton, a little closer to home, is not running the bus company any longer. She's running CODA and thinking about it and its role that it plays in all modes of transportation and doing a fantastic job. There may be no greater example in our own community and around the state and the country of reurbanization than Mark Wagenbrenner. Think of Grandview Yards, Victorian Village, the site over at Battelle. He's even redeveloping an old quarry site. If there's some old abandoned piece of property that nobody can see a vision of, call Mark and see what he might think about. I would say smart enough. And then Rebecca Karason is the corporate leader. By the way, I believe this happens when public and private work together. She's driving sustainability at the Huntington National Bank, participating in our Smart Cities Accelerator program. And then to moderate the conversation, Trudy Bartley, who plays an incredibly important role at The Ohio State University, but also thinking about her own native communities and how they redevelop and get re-energized in this process of transformation. Please welcome Trudy in this great panel for a good continuation of a discussion that's many decades to come. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Well, it is an exciting time to be in Columbus, Ohio. We are a smart city. We have wonderful leadership from a municipal and a corporate and a development standpoint. And we've got a great community that came together after the 2050 Insight plan to really look at the corridors and look at transportation, jobs, employment, workforce, and infrastructure, and look at it from a compact standpoint. We talked to the community, not only just Columbus, but the municipalities, and we heard from them that they wanted more compact development. They wanted more walkability. And today, what we're going to do is ask questions of those individuals who are representative from a national standpoint, from a transit standpoint, from a developer standpoint, as well as from a corporate standpoint, as far as how do they incorporate each of those particular areas into what they do each and every day when we're looking at those corridors that will help individuals, families, get from not only their jobs, but to their homes. So there's the first question that I have for everyone is understanding what urban footprint said and looking at what was discussed just a few minutes ago. Why do we need to connect housing, jobs, and transportation? Rebecca?
Sure. Making sure everyone hear me? All right. We need to be able to provide a simplified path from workforce development and training to the individuals that need jobs. We need to be offering programs that are able for people to be able to get to and from work, and being able to put our locations near there where there are people that need jobs. So.
Mark, the same question.
Is this working? Deep voice, all this speak louder. Well, I think for us as developers, we need to do this because it's where the market's taken us. As Alex said, it's imperative that we get this right. It's where people want to live, work, and play as close to home as possible. It leads to a higher quality of living. We're really, really fortunate in Columbus to have a lot of those ingredients already in place. I mean, the market has spoken. We're not the only developer looking and focusing solely on this type of living. And we can build mixed-use developments that bring the jobs to the people and vice versa, and we're excited to be a part of that.
Joanna.
Thank you, Trudy. If I can build on what Mark said, and Peter, I think you mentioned this, and then Alex mentioned it, that this is not a one and done. This is a fundamental shift in the American cities, how we think about the infrastructure that we've built. And we are a few generations now into living with what we've built since the 50s. And whether it's the fact that the population is going to increase by 1 million people, or even by 500,000 people, are we willing to continue doing what we're doing now? And we're seeing that it is not economically sustainable. It does not include everyone. We do not have access for everyone. And then the byproducts of this are, the pressure on the workforce, the labor, the ability to build a sustainable, economically viable. So, why do we need to do this? I think it's because it is time for us to realize that there's a fundamental shift at hand, and it's time for us to capture that opportunity.
And Peter, I know you've covered this, but if you could reiterate.
But I'm always struck by the fact that at the same time that we look forward and there's disruptive new technology and we think it's new demographics and all the rest of that, we also need to look back at our own history. And there was such a beautiful history, the history everybody values the most. The days when the streetcar suburbs were the best way to live in the suburbs, and they enhanced the intensity and quality of the downtown. They had a beautiful symmetry and synergy. And somehow we got to this point where it became either suburbs or city. And for a long time, all the policies were there to basically reject the city. And now the city has its own renaissance. And it's almost as if we now have to be very careful the suburbs just don't, that we don't flip the equation. Everybody wants to live in the city and nobody wants. and the city and the suburbs start to decay. So once again, that historic paradigm, the streetcar suburb, which is the best of both worlds, connecting both worlds, is something that I think is very powerful, and I think it's what we're thinking about when we think about these corridors.
As Alex said, transit has taken more importance in Columbus. At one time, it was something that was an afterthought, and now transit is at the tip of the tongue and it is at the table. So my question is for both Rebecca and for Joanna. Thinking about what we're seeing with the CPAS program, can you discuss transit as an employee benefit, the CPAS program, and what the future is of the PASS program? And Rebecca, can you discuss maybe other modes of transit that Huntington may be considering for the future for their employees?
Sure. Would you like me to go first?
Sure.
So the CPAS has been a great benefit for our downtown colleagues. We've gotten a lot of use out of it. CODA has been a great partner, so thank you to Huntington as well. Great feedback about the CPAS program. Currently, we have about 510 participants in the CPAS program, which is about 33%, and our goal is to reach 50%. So we've scheduled so far about 4 informational sessions, doing 2 more to get more colleagues involved, and we think that is going to happen. So it's been a great program for our colleagues to utilize downtown. For other mobility programs, we actually launched a pilot rideshare program with Share. I know Share's in the room today. To kind of fill that need, to see if there's a need around transportation, because that's the big question. We want to be able to solve a problem, and we think that there is a need with our workforce with transportation. So with that pilot program, we are doing it with 5 of our locations. 3 are downtown, and then 2 are out in the suburbs. And it's to, we're looking at it from an environmental lens, which I think is unique from a workforce, and that's where workforces are trying to go. We want to be able to reduce carbon emissions. We want to be able to, again, solve a need and solve a problem. But we're very exciting things happening right now at Huntington when it's around mobility. So.
Well, thank you, Rebecca. Huntington's been one of our best partners with the CPAS program. If you're not familiar, the Downtown Special Improvement District is a zone in downtown Columbus where every employer can enroll an employee where there is an employer-paid transit pass. So CODA is helping subsidize the cost, the employer pays portion, and MORPC is working with us. We reuse federal dollars for congestion mitigation air quality dollars to ensure that the pass becomes an employee benefit. Just like you have health insurance, think about mobility as a benefit paid for by the employer using federal funds and using local sales tax funds. And why are we trying to do this? It's interesting to me, speaking to our colleagues in economic development, that employment guarantee, so what's keeping us from having more jobs coming to the region is that concern. Can the employee actually find a way to get to that job, not only tomorrow, but in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now? So to the extent that the way a person moves might actually preclude us from growing the way we want to, it was an initial pilot, and I'm really excited to announce that we have more than 14,000 people enrolled, and almost 1 million trips have been taken in 7 months. We did not expect those type of results. Yeah, it's pretty. The people you should be clapping for are at the 2 tables here, the CODA team, because they're the ones pulling that off. But it's really signaling a shift and a desire that people want this type of access, and to have employers saying it's working for me, and to have employers outside of the downtown district saying, how do I sign up? Because I don't necessarily want to be in the parking lot business, the operational and maintenance and repair costs long term. What else can I do to develop that land and generate revenue instead of letting it sit idle? It's a really great start, and I love that. Did you say it earlier that we might be the city that gets this right? Yeah. So I'm a big fan, and I think our region can pull this off with other novel projects.
Wonderful. Thank you, Joanna. Mark, affordability is a topic of conversation. It's in the papers, both nationally and locally. So from an affordability standpoint, when you're looking at this compact redevelopment or development along these corridors or spines, it is a main focus, and particularly in Columbus. How do you assure that affordable is a part of this type of development?
Well, I think we got to start by obviously planning for it, and the city is obviously very ahead of this, and as our costs go up, and we're starting to really see that. I mean, two things: we need to make sure we continue to provide enough housing across the board to meet our growth, but we really have to, I think, take a deep dive and examine how we're providing housing of the most needed type, the most deeply affordable housing. Never have there been less resources from a federal level. We applaud the mayor and the city and how they got out ahead of it. We put some new programs in place to help for workforce housing and hopefully generate some resources. But again, it starts with the plan, and as we all this opportunity ahead of us, we have the incredible amount of momentum. Columbus is obviously getting the attention nationally, and we've really done all this to date with organic growth. And as we kind of set ourselves up for the growth pattern that we're on with all these opportunities we have, we all have to be, as developers and across the city, we have to be committed to finding ways to provide the housing that needs to be provided. And I think if we look within the affordable housing business itself, there's a lot of reform that needs to happen within it, and we have to do more with less. And I think more and more the whole industry is aware of that, and nobody does it better than Columbus. I think that getting people together around the table to solve some of these problems with the real passion to get this right, and we're in the first or second inning on that. Mayor Ginther's leadership has really brought everybody to the table, and stay tuned. I think we have great things coming.
Yes, Peter.
I'd like to add something just to reassert one of the data points that Joe gave you, which was about $8,000 a year savings for each household that lives in an environment where they can use cars less is a big one. Another one that gets hidden is the cost of parking. If you get to a structured parking environment in multifamily, you're talking $20,000, $30,000 a stall.
At least in counting.
Yeah, and counting. That is, and then you want to talk about affordable housing. I mean, that is, maybe 20 or 30% of the housing cost right there. So creating places where people really don't have to, where owning a car is optional, and maybe sharing a car on weekends with various businesses, this is a breakthrough in terms of affordability on every level.
And generationally, we're seeing the younger you get, the more you're accepting of leaving your car behind. And, someone would have told me 10 years ago that we could do development in Columbus, Ohio that didn't start with, at least a parking space per bedroom. I wouldn't have believed it. But now, and that's why these efforts are so important. It just helps lead the conversation that you don't have to start with an enormous amount of parking ratio to get a project off the ground.
Yeah.
Peter, around the country, what you're seeing, particularly with revitalization, particularly in urban corridors, you are seeing displacement. So in your travels and what you have done across the country, what are key public strategies that should be implemented now to help prevent resident and business displacement? And how can these strategies ensure an equitable approach to benefit all communities?
Well, we like to start with redevelopment on commercial land before residential. So right off the bat, we like to avoid touching the existing housing stock. And more often than not, you have to do the numbers, but more often than not, that gives you a huge reservoir of potential. So that's a really a big one idea. And quite frankly, California hasn't figured that out. They're stumbling around trying to do state laws that increase density around transit, regardless of what the existing development is. And I keep yelling and pulling my hair out. No. Just start with the commercial land. don't piss off all the homeowners and don't displace the apartment buildings that are already there. They're affordable by nature. So that's the first part of how you make it politically viable. The other thing is that if you zone for mixed use in that replacement, the pro forma of the development is largely driven by the housing that sits above, but you still have ground floor space that you want to fill up with businesses. So you're not really displacing business. You're changing the nature of it maybe. One of the most exciting things I'm seeing right now is this thing called WeWork, which is, a small, ubiquitous space that anybody can rent a desk or an office or a suite, and they can run their own business. And these can be really close to home. So imagine on corridors, the ground floor, kind of part of it is shops and cafes and restaurants, and part of it is WeWork. Everybody from the surrounding area can literally walk to a desk that they can run their own business out of. And more we see this emerging workforce that is doing their own thing, whether it's the makers or startups or what have you, and there's really no place for them in the standard office complex, office park, as it were. And so I think we'll see a transition, just like Amazon brought us out of bricks and mortar and the retail. I think WeWorks is going to bring us out of the office park syndrome.
Thank you. Joanna, in your travels and your speaking engagements across the country, representing CODA in a fabulous fashion, what are other communities doing in their transit as far as development and growth?
Well, we've been doing a lot of benchmarking across the nation. There was a lot of talk early on with the introductions by President Hardin and Jaromir about capturing this opportunity. Like, we do not want to become X or Y because they already are experiencing it. How do we avoid that potential? Just a recent trip in Seattle, so they have a commitment to sustainability, both financially and economic or environmentally. They have hills on one side, sound on the other, so land's constrained. So they have severe congestion. They have homelessness rates that are really troubling. They have affordability issues with their housing stock, but yet they have significant amounts of jobs, corporate stewards, and they have come together, just like we are doing here with the MPO, the regional entities, the cities, and at the state level, where they have committed to reducing commuter trips by single occupant vehicle by less than 50%. That's a big number. Here we are at about 82%. And in the first 7 years of this program, they have already gotten this down to below 50%. They're in about the 36% range. But those are significant investments in transit. So every modal option is available to me. I can bike, I can walk, I can use the bus, I can use the connected systems. Our park and rides here usually have about 50 spaces out in the suburbs. Theirs have 1,600. And they are mixed use with commercial, and there's housing surrounding them. So it really, working together, dedicating all of their federal CMAQ dollars to say that I will reduce congestion, pollution, and white knuckle time on the interstate to make sure that people are moving around is one example that comes to mind. They just won National Transit System of the Year for large system. We won National Transit System of the Year in a mid-sized city. So we're looking to our big brothers and big sisters to see what we can be doing as well.
Thank you. Rebecca, from a broader perspective and a business perspective, why do you think our region needs to be thinking about how and where we grow?
I think for us, it's the workforce. It's knowing where the workforce is going to be, the transportation that connects the workforce. But everything that we're talking about, everything that this panel is talking about, all revolves around behavior change. all this has to do with behavior change. This is something that can be very uncomfortable to some people to try. It is generational. We find even in our workforce trying out, rideshare programs as well. But again, I feel like at the end of the day, if there is a need, which we're finding there is a need across the whole city of Columbus, that there is a need to be able to connect that transportation to the workforce. And I think you're going to see more employers doing that. It's been really great working with Smart Columbus, being able to hit their, kind of their thresholds of where we need to be when it comes to mobility. And like I said, they look at it as well with an environmental lens. And I think you have to pair that. I think it can't just be about mobility. It has to be about the environmental impacts as well, because that really connects the dots to people, not just saying, well, I need to get to work, that's a need, but then they see the environmental impact that it has as well if they're able to ride share, if they're able to ride their bike. So I think from a workforce standpoint and company standpoint, corporation standpoint, I think we're going to see where more employers are going to be offering this as a benefit, a ride-sharing benefit for their colleagues, for their employees. In Huntington, we're very proud to be doing that. It's all about options. It's all about providing options to your workforce. And I feel like that is going to be the key to success in the city of Columbus, to be able to do that.
Mark, from a development perspective and thinking about the information that we've seen in the presentation today, what are some of the barriers to implementing the strategies that are in the study?
I think they gave this to me because my other one wasn't working. So the barriers to implementation, almost always go back, for us, it's zoning and entitlements and getting projects planned and brought to market. So as we hear about all these great reasons why this type of development is smarter to do, more cost-effective, greener, this is incredibly helpful. What we've seen in the last, since the 2050 study, now we're going to coffee shop meetings, and it doesn't start with us having to convince every person of the advantages of density. I mean, a lot of times there are people already in the conversation from the neighborhood that are anticipating this and are speaking on behalf of its betterment. So we can't have enough of these type of efforts as and as Alex said, this is just a start. I mean, the only way we're going to get this as right as we can get it is by continuing to make this part of the conversation and engaging the minds of the people in this room. As developers, we're the point guard that distributes ideas to the people executing them, and we just can't get enough of these type of things as we continue to try to make Columbus a better place.
Thank you. And Peter, the last question is for you. Looking at Central Ohio and all of your stays in Central Ohio, what would you say our next steps are in the mobility conversation as far as how we move forward?
Well, I don't want to repeat myself. I think that the next steps aren't about technology. They're about political consensus. How do you shape coalitions and work through the various jurisdictions in a way that gets you to a coherent consensus that goes beyond just the city of Columbus, and reaches a regional scale. And that's a difficult proposition, because every place feels like it's different, and so you have that to work with. And then when you get right down to the actual project that you have the neighbors who always feel different than anybody else. And these big numbers don't matter. It's like, what is it going to be like living next to that? So I think in the end, it's a political challenge that you're going to be up against next. And you need to orchestrate the next steps in terms of community participation, coalition building. I mean, one of the most powerful things, and the reason we developed Urban Footprint, was that it's never good enough to just analyze something according to traffic, or analyze something according to affordable housing, or workforce viability, or economic development. Those silos are what frustrate the coalition. And quite frankly, by demonstrating the co-benefits, I think you can begin to build political coalitions that really can span the differences that exist. You know, it was so ironic. We got hired to come in and try to save a transit system that was being built in Honolulu. $2 billion from the feds already on the table and through construction documents, and the Sierra Club came out against it. The environmentalists against transit. I was just dumbfounded. But their reasoning was it's growth inducing. The island, the carrying capacity of the island shouldn't have more people. And so, but that's based on a certain footprint per person, a certain environmental need, and a certain, and the negative side, of course, was the next generation had to leave the island because there wasn't enough housing and it was too expensive. And so when we revealed all these secondary and co-benefits of doing transit-oriented development, the Sierra Club changed its mind, went over to the side of light and goodness, and we won the election and the system is being built. It's that kind of political thinking and coalition building that I think is the next step.
Well, thank you. I think we may have a minute for a question. If anyone would have one, if they could step over to the mic. Okay, they're leaving. They're leaving. Okay, well, since see no one going to the mic, I'd like to thank our panelists, Rebecca Carson from Huntington, Mark Wagenbrenner from Wagenbrenner, Joanna Pinkerton from CODA, and Peter Calthorpe from Urban Footprint. So if we could give them applause. And thank you, everyone.
All right. Thank you again to our panel. This has been an amazing discussion. I'm William Murdoch with the Mid-Ohio Regional Planning Commission. Let's give them another round of applause for taking their time out. So if you've been to a MORPC event, you know that we finish on time or early, and so I'm going to get you out of here in 3 minutes so you can get to networking, and all those questions you saved up you can get our panelists with. The common theme today was that today was the starting point for what's next. And if we really want to move the needle on things like transportation or housing or development, corridor concept shows us how it can be done. Focused growth allows us to see so many benefits, whether it's increased quality of life, transportation options, or even reduced tax expenditures. Those are really powerful things, and we think that we can do them in Central Ohio. So what's next is exactly what Peter finished with, and that is what communities in Central Ohio, either on these corridors or not, are ready to step up and really look at how they can make the investments, the changes they need to make, and the collaboration that needs to happen to do the types of things that we saw today. And what we think are the 4 next steps are really simple. We got to have conversations with communities, businesses, residents about what comes next. Share what we've learned in this study. Share how compelling we think it is and how it can get in front of some of our challenges. We think we also need to be having conversations with our peers around the country. If you look at other regions, they're ahead of us on some of these strategies. They're making long-term investments. They're being successful. We want to take community and business leaders to go and learn from them so we can be inspired to do it here. We also think, and I know CODA feels very strongly about this, we need to be unafraid to try new things in transit. We need to make new investments. We need to make new innovations. We need to move quickly. Planners have this term called tactical urbanism. I think CODA's talking about something called transit innovation tests. What we want to do is we want to try transit ideas on corridors in Central Ohio to see if we can recognize these benefits, not 10 years from now, but very, very soon. And testing those ideas out can show us the benefits, and it means that we can make better long-term investments. Other places around the country are doing this: Boston, Austin, Charlotte, Seattle. They're trying these ideas. They're moving quickly. We can do that here too. And the last thing we want to do, this is MORPC's engaged, ULI's engaged. We think that you need long-term sustained planning to keep the eye on the ball. I think Alex Fischer mentioned this is a 100-year strategy. That means we're going to need technical assistance and tools and smart software tools like Urban Footprint to really give us the ability to weave all this together. So you wonder what the next steps are? It's that conversations and political will to be that quarter that goes next, conversations with our peers, smart technical assistance and planning, and not being afraid of new transit ideas. We want you to be a part of this. The study is 80-some pages. It's going to be available to you. This is just the starting point. We want you to help Central Ohio really get in front of our challenges. And with that, we're going to finish early. So thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.